फोन निकाला, क्यूआर कोड स्कैन किया और खचाक, पैसे ट्रांसफर हो गए, एकदम इंस्टेंट।
हाँ बिल्कुल।
लेकिन क्या कभी सोचा है कि उस एक क्लिक के पीछे क्या है? इट्स नॉट जस्ट एन ऐप, इट्स अ होल फाइनेंशियल यूनिवर्स जो बैकग्राउंड में काम कर रहा है।
सही बात है।
आज हम उसी यूनिवर्स की गहराइयों में उतरेंगे टू सी हाउ मनी रियली मूव्स इन इंडिया। एंड हे, अगर इस तरह के नॉलेज पैक्ड एडवेंचर्स पसंद है तो जल्दी से सब्सक्राइब बटन दबा दो, लाइक ठोको और नोटिफिकेशन बेल को ऑन कर लो सो यू नेवर मिस आउट।
कूल ना?
बिल्कुल। तो आज का हमारा ब्रॉड माइक्रो थीम है फाइनेंशियल मार्केट एंड पेमेंट सिस्टम।
ओके।
इसे हम स्टेप बाय स्टेप डीकोड करेंगे। फर्स्ट, we'll understand the very structure of the Indian financial market, मतलब a foundation.
Right. Then we'll meet the market's referee, SEBI. उसके बाद we'll demystify some tricky terms like alternative investment funds, derivatives और एक illegal practice जिसका नाम है front running.
Interesting.
फिर we'll take a tour of India's global ambition, GIFT City and its new foreign currency settlement system. We'll also see कि bond yield का seesaw कैसे काम करता है.
Okay.
And finally, we'll dive into the digital payment revolution's backbone, the Payments Regulatory Board, and of course, UPI, before wrapping up with a look at the iconic BSE and sovereign credit ratings. So buckle up, it's going to be a ride.
Fantastic. Let's start right at the beginning. The fundamental structure. Okay, so first up, money market versus capital market.
Money market versus capital market. Simply put, financial market एक ऐसी जगह है जहां money is bought and sold.
Okay. इसके दो मेन हिस्से हैं। मनी मार्केट है शॉर्ट टर्म नीड्स के लिए, think of it as a cash wallet.
Cash wallet. Got it.
And the capital market is for long-term investment, more like a wealth creation engine.
अच्छा, तो एक रियल लाइफ एग्जाम्पल से समझाते हैं। मान लो एक बड़ी कंपनी को इस महीने अपने एम्प्लॉइज को सैलरी देने के लिए तुरंत कैश चाहिए। दे नीड लिक्विडिटी।
Right, for a very short period.
हाँ, लेस देन अ ईयर, तो वो मनी मार्केट जाएगी।
Correct.
लेकिन अगर उसी कंपनी को एक नई फैक्ट्री बनानी है, अ 5-year प्रोजेक्ट,
Right.
तो दे विल गो टू द कैपिटल मार्केट टू रेज फंड्स। समझे? द टाइमलाइन इज द की।
Exactly. Let's get into the details. Introduction. हर इकोनॉमी को रन करने के लिए फ्यूल चाहिए और वो फ्यूल है पैसा.
राइट।
The financial market is the system that supplies this fuel, channeling it from people who have savings to those who need it for investment, जैसे businesses या government.
ओके, बैकग्राउंड की बात करें तो एज इंडियाज इकोनॉमी स्टार्टेड ग्रोइंग, स्पेशली 1991 रिफॉर्म्स के बाद हमें एक ऑर्गेनाइज सिस्टम की जरूरत पड़ी टू चैनल दी सेविंग्स इनटू प्रोडक्टिव इन्वेस्टमेंट्स।
Right, structured system.
वहीं से मनी मार्केट और कैपिटल मार्केट का फॉर्मल डेवलपमेंट गेन स्पीड हुआ। पहले इट वाज नॉट दिस स्ट्रक्चर्ड। अब आते हैं कोर लॉजिक पर।
Okay.
फर्स्ट मनी मार्केट, जिसे हमने कैश वॉलेट कहा। ड्यूरेशन, इसका गोल्डन रूल है लेस देन 1 year। ये एकदम शॉर्ट टर्म है।
ठीक है.
रिस्क, जनरली लो रिस्क एंड हाई लिक्विडिटी होता है, मतलब पैसा सेफ रहता है एंड यू कैन गेट इट बैक क्विकली।
और इसका रेगुलेटर कौन है? ये इंपॉर्टेंट है ना?
सुपर इंपॉर्टेंट, याद रखना, द रेगुलेटर फॉर द मनी मार्केट इज द रिजर्व बैंक ऑफ इंडिया।
RBI. Okay.
हाँ, क्योंकि आरबीआई का काम है टू मैनेज द कंट्रीज लिक्विडिटी। की प्लेयर्स इसमें मोस्टली बिग प्लेयर्स होते हैं, बैंक्स, द गवर्नमेंट एंड लार्ज कॉर्पोरेट्स। ये उनके टेम्पररी कैश क्रंच को सॉल्व करने के लिए है।
और इसके इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स, I've heard terms like T-bills.
हाँ, कॉमन इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स हैं ट्रेजरी बिल्स, टी बिल्स, जो गवर्नमेंट यूज करती है फॉर शॉर्ट टर्म बोरोइंग। कॉल मनी है फॉर इंटर बैंक ओवरनाइट लोन्स।
अच्छा, बैंक्स के बीच में.
यस, कमर्शियल पेपर सीपी कॉर्पोरेट्स यूज करते हैं और सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ डिपॉजिट्स सीडीज बैंक्स। इसकी एनोलॉजी है अ क्रेडिट कार्ड फॉर डेली कॉर्पोरेट नीड्स, क्विक कैश फॉर इमीडिएट ऑब्लिगेशंस।
Makes sense. अब कैपिटल मार्केट.
कैपिटल मार्केट, द इन्वेस्टमेंट फॉर लॉन्ग टर्म वेल्थ। ड्यूरेशन, एनीथिंग मोर देन 1 year। ये लॉन्ग टर्म गेम है।
तो रिस्क भी ज्यादा होगा.
बिल्कुल, इट कैन बी हाई रिस्क एंड वॉलेटाइल, बट द ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल इज ऑल्सो वेरी हाई।
और इसका रेगुलेटर?
The watchdog here is the Securities and Exchange Board of India.
SEBI. Got it.
Key players इसमें सब हैं, रिटेल इन्वेस्टर्स जैसे हम और आप, म्यूचुअल फंड्स, फॉरेन इंस्टीट्यूशनल इन्वेस्टर्स, FIIs।
इसके भी सब टाइप्स होते हैं, राइट? प्राइमरी और सेकेंडरी मार्केट.
करेक्ट। प्राइमरी मार्केट जहां न्यू सिक्योरिटीज इशू होती हैं फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम, जैसे जोमैटो का IPO, इनिशियल पब्लिक ऑफरिंग। यहाँ पैसा सीधा इन्वेस्टर से कंपनी के पास जाता है।
और सेकेंडरी मार्केट?
वो है स्टॉक मार्केट, BSE, NSE। यहाँ एग्जिस्टिंग शेयर्स की ट्रेडिंग होती है फ्रॉम वन इन्वेस्टर टू अनदर। कंपनी इज नॉट डायरेक्टली इन्वॉल्व्ड।
Analogy for this?
This is like a home loan, a long-term commitment to build a significant asset.
Perfect. What's the real world impact of all this?
A strong financial market businesses को grow करने में मदद करता है, jobs create करता है और आम लोगों को अपनी savings invest करके wealth create करने का मौका देता है, beating inflation.
So conclusion क्या है?
Conclusion ये है कि money market economy की day-to-day liquidity manage करता है, while capital market उसके long-term growth को fund करता है। दोनों एक ही सिक्के के दो पहलू हैं।
That's a very clear breakdown. Let's dig a bit deeper. एग्जाम्स के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से मनी मार्केट और कैपिटल मार्केट की रेगुलेटर्स में एब्सोल्यूट की डिफरेंस क्या है?
द की डिफरेंस है उनका डोमेन ऑफ कंट्रोल, जो मार्केट के पर्पस से लिंक्ड है। मनी मार्केट को आरबीआई रेगुलेट करती है क्योंकि वो शॉर्ट टर्म लिक्विडिटी, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी और बैंकिंग सिस्टम से डील करता है, जो आरबीआई का कोर टेरिटोरी है।
राइट।
ऑन द अदर हैंड, कैपिटल मार्केट डील्स विद लॉन्ग टर्म इन्वेस्टमेंट्स थ्रू सिक्योरिटीज लाइक स्टॉक्स।
और इसका रेगुलेटर सेबी है, जिसका प्राइमरी मैंडेट है इन्वेस्टर प्रोटेक्शन एंड मार्केट डेवलपमेंट।
ओके, दैट मेक्स सेंस। आपने ट्रेजरी बिल्स मेंशन किया। क्या कोई प्राइवेट कंपनी से रिलायंस टी बिल इशू कर सकती है? क्यों या क्यों नहीं?
एब्सोल्युटली नॉट। ट्रेजरी बिल्स या टी बिल्स एक्सक्लूसिवली सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया इशू करती है टू मीट इट्स शॉर्ट टर्म फंडिंग नीड्स।
अच्छा, सिर्फ सरकार?
हाँ, दे आर कंसिडर्ड वन ऑफ द सेफेस्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट्स क्योंकि वो सॉवरेन गारंटी से बैक्ड होते हैं। प्राइवेट कंपनीज कमर्शियल पेपर, सीपी जैसे इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स यूज करती हैं।
गॉट इट। व्हाट अबाउट द कॉल मनी मार्केट? क्या एक रिटेल इन्वेस्टर लाइक यू एंड मी उसमें पार्टिसिपेट कर सकता है? थोड़ा सोच लो।
दैट्स अ ग्रेट क्वेश्चन। इसका जवाब है अ फर्म नो। कॉल मनी मार्केट एक इंटरबैंक मार्केट है।
इंटरबैंक, यस। ये प्राइमरीली बैंक्स के लिए हैं टू लेंड एंड बोरो फ्रॉम ईच अदर फॉर वेरी शॉर्ट पीरियड्स, टिपिकली ओवरनाइट, टू मैनेज देयर डेली लिक्विडिटी। रिटेल इन्वेस्टर्स कांट पार्टिसिपेट डायरेक्टली।
ऑलराइट। नाउ कैपिटल मार्केट को मनी मार्केट के कंपैरिजन में हाई रिस्क क्यों माना जाता है?
The primary reason is volatility and duration. Capital market instruments like stocks, एक कंपनी की future performance, profits, economic conditions, market sentiment, इन सब पर depend करते हैं, जो rapidly change हो सकते हैं।
राइट।
Money market instruments, being short-term debt with a fixed maturity, काफी stable होते हैं। The longer the time horizon, the more uncertainty and risk.
And just to lock it in memory, can you explain that credit card and home loan analogy one more time?
Of course, the money market is like a credit card. आप इसे शॉर्ट टर्म नीड्स के लिए यूज करते हैं, जैसे कंपनी सैलरीज पे कर रही हैं और आप एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं कि ये जल्दी सेटल हो जाएगा। इट्स अबाउट इमीडिएट कैश फ्लो।
Okay.
द कैपिटल मार्केट इज लाइक अ होम लोन। इट्स अ ह्यूज लॉन्ग टर्म कमिटमेंट टू बिल्ड अ सिग्निफिकेंट एसेट लाइक अ फैक्ट्री। रिस्क ज्यादा है, बट पोटेंशियल फॉर ग्रेट वैल्यू अप्रिसिएशन भी है।
Awesome. Now, this is a core concept. Pause and practice saying money market is for short-term needs regulated by RBI, while capital market is for long-term growth regulated by SEBI.
इन शॉर्ट, फाइनेंशियल मार्केट के दो की पार्ट्स हैं, एक शॉर्ट टर्म कैश मैनेजमेंट के लिए मनी और दूसरा लॉन्ग टर्म वेल्थ क्रिएशन के लिए कैपिटल।
Okay, let's unpack this. If the capital market is the playground, we need a referee. Let's talk about SEBI,
एग्जैक्टली, सेबी, द मार्केट वॉचडॉग।
market watchdog.
इसका फुल नेम है सिक्योरिटीज एंड एक्सचेंज बोर्ड ऑफ इंडिया। बेसिकली सेबी इंडिया के सिक्योरिटीज और कमोडिटी मार्केट्स का रेगुलेटर है। इसका मेन काम है टू प्रोटेक्ट द इंटरेस्ट्स ऑफ इन्वेस्टर्स एंड टू इंश्योर कि मार्केट फेयरली एंड ट्रांसपेरेंटली चले।
तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर कोई कंपनी अपने शेयर्स बेचने के लिए झूठे प्रोमिस करती है, प्राइस मैनिपुलेट करती है,
तो सेबी स्टेप इन कर सकता है, इन्वेस्टिगेशन करेगा एंड अगर कंपनी गिल्टी पाई गई तो हैवी फाइन्स लगाएगा और इवन बैन कर सकता है।
so that's cool ना? It protects the small guy.
Precisely. Let's look at SEBI in more detail. Introduction. किसी भी फेयर गेम के लिए you need an unbiased and powerful referee. सिक्योरिटीज मार्केट में वो रेफरी है सेबी।
Right.
बैकग्राउंड, 1980s और अर्ली 90s में मार्केट स्कैम से भरा था। प्राइस रिगिंग, इनसाइडर ट्रेडिंग।
हर्षद मेहता scam.
हाँ, the infamous Harshad Mehta scam of 1992 was the final wake-up call. इन्वेस्टर्स का ट्रस्ट शैटर हो गया था। उसी ट्रस्ट को रिस्टोर करने के लिए सेबी एक्ट ऑफ 1992 पास हुआ और सेबी को स्टैट्यूटरी पावर्स दी गई।
Okay, so the core logic is based on that act.
Yes, establishment ये 1988 में सेटअप हुआ था एज अ नॉन स्टैट्यूटरी बॉडी, बट इट गॉट इट्स रियल टीथ and became a statutory body on January 30, 1992.
और इसका objective?
Three primary objectives: protecting investors, promoting market development, and regulating market functions.
And powers.
It's very powerful. It has powers similar to a civil code under the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. It can summon people, conduct investigations, enforce its orders.
Board of directors की composition कैसी होती है?
Composition important है. इसमें एक chairman होता है, nominated by the union government, 2 members from the Union Ministry of Finance, 1 member from the RBI और 5 और members nominated by the union government.
Okay, quite a mix of expertise.
हाँ, recent decisions की बात करें तो SEBI is always evolving, जैसे स्वागत FII framework to make it easier for foreign investors. एक और बड़ा स्टेप था reclassification of REITs as equity.
REITs, what's that?
Real Estate Investment Trusts. ये आपको लार्ज स्केल प्रॉपर्टीज के पोर्टफोलियो में इन्वेस्ट करने का मौका देते हैं। By classifying them as equity, SEBI ने म्यूचुअल फंड्स को इनमें ज्यादा इन्वेस्ट करने की परमिशन दे दी, boosting the real estate sector.
Real world impact क्या है SEBI का?
Thanks to SEBI's regulations, investor confidence in the Indian market has grown immensely. इससे domestic और foreign participation बढ़ा है, which has been crucial for the economy.
So the conclusion is that SEBI is a balancing act.
Exactly. SEBI constantly performs a balancing act, being a strict regulator to protect investors while also creating an environment that is friendly for investment and business growth.
That's fascinating history. So let me ask a classic exam question. Is SEBI a constitutional body or a statutory body? What's the fundamental difference?
SEBI is a statutory body. The fundamental difference ये है, a constitutional body अपनी powers directly Constitution of India से लेती है, जैसे Election Commission या UPSC.
Okay.
A statutory body, on the other hand, is created by an act of parliament. SEBI को SEBI Act of 1992 से बनाया गया, hence it's a statutory body.
Clear. और सेबी बोर्ड का चेयरमैन कौन नॉमिनेट करता है? आरबीआई या यूनियन गवर्नमेंट?
The chairman of the SEBI board is nominated by the Union Government of India. RBI का एक representative होता है बोर्ड पर, but the leadership is appointed by the central government.
आपने REITs को इक्विटी की तरह रीक्लासिफाई करने की बात की. What was the main objective there? How does that actually help mutual funds?
The main objective was to increase liquidity and investment in real estate investment trusts. म्यूचुअल फंड स्कीम्स के स्ट्रिक्ट रूल्स होते हैं कि वो डिफरेंट एसेट क्लासेस में कितना इन्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं. बाय रीक्लासिफाइंग रीट्स एज इक्विटी, सेबी ने इफेक्टिवली म्यूचुअल फंड्स के लिए इन्वेस्टमेंट लिमिट बढ़ा दी.
अच्छा.
This allows them to pump more money into REITs, which in turn brings more capital into the formal real estate sector.
What about this minimum public shareholding concept? What is it and why is it important for a listed company?
Minimum public shareholding, जो इंडिया में most listed companies के लिए 25% है, इसका मतलब है कि at least इतना % of a company's shares must be held by the public. मतलब not by the promoters.
And why is that important? ये crucial है for 3 reasons. First, it ensures enough liquidity. Second, it helps prevent price manipulation. And third, it promotes better corporate governance and transparency. And one last thing on this, what is an IPO and how does it transform a company?
IPO stands for Initial Public Offering. It's the process जहां एक private company public company बनती है by offering its shares to the general public for the first time. It's a huge transformation.
How so?
It gives the company access to a vast amount of capital for expansion, but it also means the company is now subject to much stricter regulations and scrutiny from SEBI and the public.
Brilliant. Okay, let's get this key fact down. Practice saying SEBI is a statutory body established under the SEBI Act 1992 to protect investors and regulate the securities market.
In short, SEBI is the powerful referee of the Indian stock market, जिसका main job है to ensure fairness and protect your money.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Now that we know the regulator, let's decode some of the jargon. First up, alternative investment funds.
Yes, alternative investment funds, AIFs.
Sounds complex. Let's simplify. Short definition. AIFs स्पेशल फंड्स हैं जो प्राइवेटली पैसा कलेक्ट करते हैं फ्रॉम सोफिस्टिकेटेड इन्वेस्टर्स, मतलब हाई नेटवर्थ इंडिविजुअल्स, HNIs और इंस्टीट्यूशंस, और उसे एक डिफाइंड पॉलिसी के हिसाब से इन्वेस्ट करते हैं. सो नॉट फॉर द जनरल पब्लिक.
Exactly. For example, a group of wealthy individuals एक fund बनाते हैं with the sole purpose of investing in new, high-risk tech startups. That would be a Category 1 AIF.
ओके, और वेंचर कैपिटल फंड.
Precisely. Let's discuss it. Introduction. Mutual funds के अलावा भी investment के options हैं. AIFs are one of them, designed for a different class of investors with a higher risk appetite.
बैकग्राउंड क्या है इनका?
As the Indian economy matured, a need arose for investment vehicles that could fund sectors beyond traditional stocks like startups, infrastructure, and real estate. AIFs were created to fill this gap.
Core logic. Who regulates them?
The main regulator is SEBI. However, the RBI also gives guidelines for entities it regulates, like banks when they invest in AIFs.
इसका कोई फेमस एग्जांपल है?
Huh? The Swami H Fund. It's a government-backed AIF focused on completing stalled affordable housing projects.
Categories. I hear there are different types.
Yes, this is the most important part. There are 3 categories. Category I, ये funds startups, early stage ventures या socially beneficial sectors में invest करते हैं,
Okay.
like venture capital funds.
Okay.
Category 2,
Category 2.
funds leverage या borrowed money use नहीं करते for their investments. Examples हैं private equity funds and real estate funds.
And category 3 must be the riskiest.
Yes. Category 3 funds complex trading strategies और leverage use करते हैं to generate high returns. High risk, high return. Hedge funds are a classic example.
Real world impact.
AIFs provide crucial capital to sectors like startups and infrastructure that traditional investors might find too risky. They are a vital part of the innovation ecosystem.
Conclusion.
AIFs are specialized, high-risk, high-return investment avenues for knowledgeable investors with deep pockets.
So can a small retail investor with, say, 50,000 rupees put money into an AIF?
Generally, no. AIFs are designed for sophisticated investors. The minimum investment ticket size is quite large, typically 1 crore or more.
1 crore. Okay, that keeps most people out.
Yes, that's a key difference from mutual funds.
What is the absolute key difference between Category 2 and Category 3 AIFs regarding the use of leverage?
The key difference is the use of leverage or borrowed money. Category 2 AIFs do not use leverage for their investments. Category 3 AIFs, on the other hand, actively use leverage to amplify their returns, which also amplifies their risk.
And which body regulates AIFs in India?
The primary regulator is SEBI under the SEBI Alternative Investment Funds Regulations 2012.
The Swamij Fund you mentioned, which specific sector is it focused on?
It is focused on the real estate sector, specifically providing last-mile funding for stalled, affordable and mid-income housing projects.
Can you explain what a privately pooled investment vehicle means in simple terms?
It simply means that funds are collected from a select, private group of investors, not from the general public. Unlike a mutual fund's NFO, which is advertised to everyone, an AIF gathers capital from a limited number of investors behind closed doors.
Got it. Now, let's practice saying AIFs have 3 categories.
Yes.
Category 1 for startups,
Exactly.
Category 2 without leverage, and Category 3 with leverage.
In short, AIFs are special funds for big investors, funding everything from startups to real estate. Next, equity derivatives. ये तो सुनते ही डर लगता है.
Haha, let's make it simple. Short definition. A derivative is a financial contract whose value is derived from an underlying asset. So an equity derivative's value comes from an underlying share or a stock index.
Okay, derived from.
The best analogy is dahi and doodh. Dahi is a derivative of doodh. Dahi की value दूध की quality और price पर depend करती है.
Nice analogy.
Similarly, an equity derivative's value depends on the underlying stock's price. The underlying asset can be anything with a fluctuating price: shares, indices, gold, currencies.
So, what are the common types?
The most common types are futures and options. These are essentially contracts to buy or sell a stock at a future date at a pre-decided price. Their main uses are hedging, which is risk management, and speculation.
What does the term underlying asset mean in the context of derivatives?
The underlying asset is the real asset from which the derivative gets its value. For an equity derivative, the underlying asset could be a share of Reliance. The derivative contract itself is just a financial agreement whose value moves up and down with the price of that Reliance share.
Can you name the 2 most commonly traded equity derivative products?
The 2 most common ones are futures and options.
Can a commodity like gold be an underlying asset for a derivative?
Yes, absolutely. You can have derivatives on almost anything with a variable price. Gold futures and options are extremely popular.
What is the primary purpose of using derivatives for an investor?
2 main purposes. First is hedging, managing risk. Jaise, an airline might use oil derivatives to lock in a future price for jet fuel. The second is speculation, where traders bet on the future price direction to make a profit.
Is the value of a derivative fixed or does it change?
It changes constantly, since its value is derived from the underlying asset. As the price of the underlying asset changes every second, the value of the derivative contract also changes in real time.
Okay, practice saying a derivative's value is derived from an underlying asset, like a stock or an index.
Equity derivatives are financial tools whose value depends on the future price of a stock. And now, a very important one: front running.
Yes, and this is an illegal practice.
Illegal, okay.
Front running is where a broker or fund manager uses confidential advance information about a large upcoming client order to make a personal profit.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a mutual fund manager is about to buy 1 lakh shares of company X. This large order will surely push the stock's price up.
Right, demand and supply.
Exactly. Before placing that big order, he secretly buys 1,000 shares for his own account. The fund's large order is then placed, the price shoots up, and he immediately sells his 1,000 shares for a quick, illegal profit. This is front running.
That's pure cheating.
It is. The core logic is that it's based on non-public information. It's a form of market manipulation and a breach of trust. It's illegal because it's fundamentally unfair to the client and to other market participants.
And the impact is obviously negative.
It severely undermines market integrity and erodes investor confidence. If people feel the system is rigged, they will not invest.
So why exactly is front running considered illegal?
It's illegal primarily because it's a breach of fiduciary duty. The broker is supposed to act in the client's best interest, but instead, they are using the client's confidential information for personal gain. It's an unfair advantage.
What kind of information is used to perform front running?
The key is that it's advanced, non-public information about an impending large trade that has not yet been executed.
How does this practice affect a regular investor's confidence in the market?
It shatters it. If regular investors believe that insiders are profiting from secret information at their expense, they lose trust in the market's fairness.
Who typically has the opportunity to engage in front running?
People in positions of trust with access to large trade order information. This includes brokers, dealers, mutual fund managers, and analysts.
Is front running a form of market manipulation?
Yes, it is a classic example of market manipulation. It distorts the natural price discovery process.
Right. Practice saying front running is the illegal act of trading based on non-public information about a future large transaction.
In short, front running is cheating by using secret information about a big upcoming trade to make a personal profit. Okay, so we've talked about how money is raised and regulated within India. But what about India's connection to the global financial system?
That brings us to a really ambitious project, FCSS and Gift City.
Absolutely. This is about India's ambition to become a global finance hub.
Right.
Let's start with a short definition. FCSS, or the Foreign Currency Settlement System, is a new payment system at Gift City. Gift City India का पहला international financial services center है.
Okay.
This system allows foreign currency transactions to be settled locally and almost instantly, without needing to go through international banks in other countries.
Let me give a real-life example to show why this is a game changer. Imagine two banks located inside Gift City हैं और उन्हें US डॉलर्स में एक डील सेटल करनी है.
Right. पहले, this transaction would have to be routed through a correspondent bank in New York.
Okay.
इसमें टाइम लगता था, फीस लगती थी, और ये US working hours में होता था.
No big hassle.
अब FCSS के through, that same deal can be settled directly within Gift City in real time. How cool is that?
It's a massive efficiency boost. Let's dive into the details. Introduction. For India to truly become a global financial player, it needs world-class infrastructure that can compete with hubs like Singapore and Dubai.
And Gift City is that infrastructure.
Yes, Gift City and its internal systems like FCSS are the core of the strategic project. The background is that traditionally, international currency transactions are cleared in their home country. This system is old, slow, and expensive.
So India created its own offshore zone.
Exactly. Let's talk about Gift City IFSC. It's located in Gandhinagar, Gujarat, and it is India's first and only international financial services center, IFSC.
Okay.
It's a special economic zone, SEZ. Crucially, it's treated as a non-resident zone under FEMA. This means it is legally considered offshore territory for financial transactions.
And the regulator there is different, right? Not RBI or SEBI?
This is key. It has a unified regulator called the International Financial Services Centers Authority, IFSCA, established in 2020. IFSCA regulates all financial services in the IFSC.
So one regulator for everything.
Yes. Now the Foreign Currency Settlement System, FCSS. It is authorized by IFSCA under the PSS Act 2007.
Objective.
To enable local settlement of foreign currency transactions between the banks operating within Gift City. It started with the US dollar and will add other currencies later. The operator is CCIL IFSC Limited.
What's the real-world impact?
This makes India a much more attractive destination for international financial business. It reduces transaction costs and time, attracts foreign investment, and creates high-skilled jobs.
Conclusion.
Gift City, powered by systems like FCSS, is India's ambitious effort to capture a share of the global financial services market.
Gift City, who is the boss? Who regulates the financial institutions there? Is it RBI, SEBI, or IFSCA?
The boss is IFSCA. This is a crucial point. Inside Gift City IFSC, there's a unified regulator, the International Financial Services Centers Authority. It acts as a single window regulator, replacing the separate roles of RBI, SEBI, etc.
And who's the main operator of this new FCSS?
The operator is CCIL IFSC Limited, a subsidiary of the Clearing Corporation of India Limited, CCIL.
You said Gift City is a non-resident zone under FEMA. What does that practically mean for a bank operating there?
Practically, it means that for foreign exchange laws, a bank branch in Gift City is treated as if it were a foreign branch, say in Singapore. This allows for much greater freedom in dealing with foreign currencies.
And which currency did the FCSS initially launch with for settlements?
It was initially launched to settle transactions in the US dollar.
Finally, just to be sure, what is the full form of IFSC?
IFSC stands for International Financial Services Center.
Got it. This is a very important development. Let's cement this. Practicing FCSS at Gift City enables local settlement of foreign currency transactions, and the unified regulator there is IFSCA.
In short, Gift City is India's special financial zone for global business, and FCSS is its new superfast payment highway for foreign currencies.
Okay, this is a classic concept that trips up a lot of people, but it's fundamental. Let's break down bond yield with that famous seesaw image in mind.
Yes, the seesaw is the perfect analogy. So, short definition, bond yield is simply the return an investor gets on a bond. The most important thing to remember is the inverse relationship between a bond's price and its yield. Inverse relationship. जब एक ऊपर जाता है तो दूसरा नीचे.
Exactly. It's a seesaw.
Let's use a real life example. Imagine आपने government bond खरीदा for 1,000 rupees and it pays you a fixed interest of 60 rupees every year.
Okay, fixed coupon.
हाँ. Scenario 1. Interest rates in the economy rise. RBI ने rates बढ़ा दिए. अब new bonds 80 rupees interest दे रहे हैं for the same 1,000 rupees. तो आपका bond less attractive हो गया?
8. You are still getting that fixed 60 rupees interest on a lower priced asset. So your effective return or yield has gone up.
Correct. 60 rupees on 800 rupees is a 7.5% yield. Price down, yield up.
Interest rates fall. New bonds are only paying 40 rupees. Suddenly आपका 60 rupees वाला bond super attractive हो गया.
Its price will rise.
Yes, its price will rise above 1000 rupees, say to 1200 rupees. But because you're getting 60 rupees on a higher priced asset, your effective yield goes down. 60 rupees on 1200 rupees is a 5% yield.
That's the seesaw perfectly explained. Introduction. Understanding bond yields is crucial because they are a key indicator of the economy's health.
Right, they reflect expectations.
Yes. The background is that interest rates are not static. They are influenced by RBI's policies, inflation, and government borrowing, which directly impact the bond market.
Poor logic is this inverse relationship.
Exactly. Now let's discuss two special types of bonds. First, transition bonds.
Transition.
These are a subcategory of green debt security. Objective है to help hard-to-abate sectors like steel, cement, shipping raise money for projects that help them decarbonize.
Okay, helping polluting industries become cleaner.
Yes. Second, additional Tier 1 bonds, AT1 bonds. These are also known as perpetual bonds because they have no maturity date.
No maturity.
Correct. But they have a call option, which means the issuer, usually a bank, has the right to buy them back after a certain period.
Banks issue them to meet their capital adequacy requirements.
And the real-world impact of bond yields.
Government bond yields are a benchmark for the entire economy. They influence everything from your home loan rates to the stock market's direction. So the conclusion is that this is a fundamental principle.
Yes. Mastering this inverse relationship helps in understanding the flow of money in an economy.
Okay, let's test that. If the RBI increases the repo rate, what is the most likely immediate impact on the price and yield of existing government bonds?
If the RBI increases the repo rate, overall interest rates will rise. This makes existing bonds with lower fixed rates less attractive. Consequently, their market price will fall. And as the price falls, their effective yield will rise. The seesaw in action.
You use the term perpetual bond for AT1 bonds. What does that mean exactly?
Perpetual means they have no fixed maturity date. Unlike a typical 10-year bond where you get your principal back, these can theoretically exist forever, with the investor receiving interest indefinitely.
Why are these transition bonds specifically needed for sectors like steel and cement?
Because these hard-to-abate sectors can't become fully green overnight. A normal green bond might be for a 100% green project, like a solar park. Transition bonds provide a pathway, funding projects that are steps in the right direction.
What is a call option on a bond? And does it benefit the issuer or the investor?
A call option gives the issuer, the bank, the right to buy back the bonds. This primarily benefits the issuer. If interest rates fall, the bank can call back the old, high-interest bonds and issue new ones at a lower rate.
And one last time, in the simplest terms, why does a bond's price fall when new bonds are offering higher interest?
It's pure and simple competition. If you hold a 6% bond and suddenly new, equally safe 8% bonds are available, no one will buy your 6% bond at its original price. You'll have to offer a discount, lower its price, to make it competitive. Great. This is a must-know concept. Practicing bond prices and bond yields have an inverse relationship, just like a seesaw.
In short, when overall interest rates rise, existing bond prices fall and their yields rise, and vice versa.
All right, we've covered the big markets. Now let's shift gears to how money moves in our daily lives. Digital payments. And for a revolution, you need rules. Let's talk about the rule maker, the Payments Regulatory Board.
Perfect transition. The short definition is the RBI, under the Payment and Settlement Systems Act of 27, has created a dedicated board to regulate and supervise all payment systems in India.
Okay, a special board within the RBI. Yes. This board makes the rules for everything from NEFT RTGS to mobile wallets and UPI. A real-life example would be this. आप जो UPI, Paytm या Google Pay use करते हैं, their operations must be safe, secure and fair. This is ensured by this board.
Exactly.
For instance, they can set rules for how quickly a customer must get a refund in case of a failed transaction.
They are the high command for payments.
Let's break it down. Introduction. With the explosion of digital payments, a specialized body was needed. The Payments Regulatory Board is that body.
And the background is the 2007 Act.
Correct. The PSS Act of 2007 gave RBI the formal power to regulate payment systems. The creation of this board is an exercise of that power.
What about its structure?
The composition, as per Section 3 of the Act, is designed for diverse expertise. Chairperson is the RBI Governor, ex officio.
Shows its importance.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Members include the RBI Deputy Governor in charge of payment systems, one other RBI officer, and 3 persons nominated by the central government, experts in fields like IT and cybersecurity.
Tenure.
Nominated members have a 4-year tenure, not eligible for renomination. There are also disqualification criteria, like being an MP or MLA.
And their meetings.
They must meet at least twice a year. The quorum is 3 members. Decisions are by majority vote, and the chairperson has a casting vote in case of a tie.
So the real-world impact is creating trust in digital payments.
Exactly. It ensures that as new technologies emerge, there are clear rules to protect customers and maintain the stability of the financial system.
Conclusion.
This board is RBI's way of being a proactive and specialized regulator, ensuring India's payment systems are robust and trustworthy.
Okay, let's hit some key factual questions. Who is the ex officio chairperson of the Payments Regulatory Board? Very important.
The governor of the Reserve Bank of India is the ex-official chairperson.
What is the minimum number of members required for a meeting to be valid? The quorum.
The quorum is 3 members, and this must include either the chairperson, the RBI governor, or the deputy governor.
Under which specific act was this board constituted?
It was constituted under the provisions of the Payment and Settlement Systems Act 2007.
Here's a tricky one. Can a sitting member of parliament, MP, be a nominated member of this board?
No. The rules explicitly state that MPs and MLAs are disqualified from being nominated members to maintain its political neutrality.
And what is a casting vote and who gets to use it in this board's meetings?
A casting vote is a deciding vote used only when there is a tie. The chairperson, the RBI governor, has this casting vote to break the deadlock.
Super clear. This structure is important. Let's practice saying the Payments Regulatory Board, chaired by the RBI governor, regulates India's payment systems under the PSS Act 2007.
Simply put, this board is the high command that sets the rules for all digital transactions in India.
Okay, if the Payments Board sets the rules, let's talk about the star player of the game, the one that changed everything. UPI, India's digital payment revolution, goes global.
The UPI is truly a revolution. The short definition is UPI, or Unified Payments Interface, is an instant, real-time payment system developed by NPCI. It allows users to transfer funds between bank accounts instantly, 24/7, using a single mobile application.
And it's built on IMPS?
Yes, built on the IMPS infrastructure.
The real-life example is everywhere. But the coolest recent example is its global reach. The fact that an Indian tourist in France can now scan a QR code and pay directly from their Indian bank account using UPI is mind-blowing.
And now, countries like Namibia are adopting the UPI stack for their own citizens. This is UPI going global.
Incredible success.
Let's analyze it. Introduction. UPI hasn't just changed how India transacts, it has fundamentally altered our relationship with money.
Background is that it made IMPS user-friendly.
Exactly. Before UPI, we had NEFT and RTGS. IMPS was 24/7, but not as simple. UPI took the power of IMPS and built an extremely simple mobile-first layer on top of it.
Let's get to the core logic.
Okay.
About UPI, it was launched by the National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI, in 2016. It's built over IMPS, uniqueness.
24/7 and 365 days, money transfer, simple virtual payment address, and strong security. Recently, the per-transaction limit for certain merchant payments was raised to 5 lakh rupees.
And the international expansion is managed by whom?
By NIPL, NPCI International Payments Limited, a dedicated subsidiary of NPCI. Its global footprint is now in countries like Bhutan, France, Singapore, UAE, and more.
And tell us more about the parent, NPCI.
NPCI is a not-for-profit company. This is a very important point. Its goal is not profit, but building public digital infrastructure.
Right.
It was set up as an initiative of the RBI and the Indian Banks Association, IBA, under the PSS Act 2007, is the umbrella for all retail payments.
It runs other things too, right?
Yes, RuPay cards, FASTag, IMPS, Aadhaar-enabled payment system, AEPS, and more.
Real-world impact has been massive financial inclusion.
Massive. It has reduced dependency on cash and has been a huge driver in formalizing the economy.
So, conclusion.
UPI is arguably India's biggest fintech gift to the world, showcasing how to build public digital infrastructure at scale.
Fantastic. Let's nail down some facts. Who launched UPI in 2016?
UPI was launched by the National Payments Corporation of India, or NPCI, in 2016.
Is NPCI a government-owned company or a for-profit private company?
It's neither. It is a not-for-profit company set up as an initiative of the RBI and the IBA. Its primary objective is public good, not profit.
UPI is built on which underlying payment infrastructure?
It's built on top of the IMPS, Immediate Payment Service Infrastructure.
Which specific entity is responsible for the international deployment of UPI?
The international expansion is handled by NPCI International Payments Limited, a wholly owned subsidiary of NPCI.
Besides UPI, can you name 2 other major payment systems managed by NPCI?
Certainly. 2 prominent ones are the RuPay card network, which is India's domestic card scheme, and FASTag for toll collection.
Fantastic. This is a topic of national pride. Let's practice saying UPI, launched by the not-for-profit NPCI, is an instant payment system that is now being adopted globally.
In short, UPI is the revolutionary Indian mobile payment system that has made sending money as easy as sending a text message.
All right, Let's wrap up with a few more quick but important updates. First up, an old giant, a true institution.
Yes, let's talk about the Bombay Stock Exchange, BSE.
Okay,
BSE is Asia's first stock exchange, established way back in 1875.
1875, wow.
It has a rich history. Originally established as the Native Share and Stockbrokers Association, the year 2025 will mark its 150th anniversary.
A huge milestone. A fun fact. In 2017, it became the first listed stock exchange in India. So you can buy shares of the stock exchange on the stock exchange. Haha, nice.
Its primary role is to provide a transparent market for trading. And who regulates it? Of course, the capital market regulator, SEBI.
So, in which year was the BSE established?
It was established in 1875.
Just for perspective, is BSE older than the New York Stock Exchange?
That's a fun question. No, the NYSE is older. Its origins go back to 1792. But being established in 1875 still makes the BSE one of the oldest in the world.
And who is the primary regulator for the BSE?
The primary regulator for the BSE, like all stock exchanges in India, is SEBI.
Got it. Practice saying, BSE, established in 1875, is Asia's first and oldest stock exchange.
BSE is the grand old institution of the Indian capital market, celebrating 150 years of history and trust very soon.
And finally, let's talk about the country's financial report card.
Exactly. We're talking about India's sovereign credit rating.
The country's CIBIL score. Perfect analogy. Short definition. A sovereign credit rating is an independent assessment of a country's creditworthiness. It tells global investors how likely a country is to pay back its debt. Okay. The news context, recently S&P upgraded India's outlook to positive from stable. This is a positive signal. And who are the main agencies? The global market is dominated by the big three, S&P, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch.
And the rating grades.
Broadly divided into two categories. Investment grade is considered safe. Speculative grade, also called junk grade, is riskier. India's BBB- rating is the lowest investment grade rating.
And its significance. A favorable rating is very important. It makes it easier and cheaper for a country and its companies to borrow money from foreign markets. It also attracts more FDI.
So what is the main purpose of a sovereign credit rating?
The main purpose is to give global investors a standardized measure of the risk associated with lending money to a particular country's government.
Can you name one of the top 3 global credit rating agencies?
The big three are Standard & Poor's, S&P, Moody's, and Fitch.
What is the basic difference between an investment grade and a speculative grade rating?
Investment grade is a seal of approval that the country has a low risk of defaulting. Speculative grade is a warning that there is a higher risk, so the investment is not as safe.
How does a better credit rating help a country reduce its borrowing costs?
It's a simple risk-reward relationship. A better credit rating signifies lower risk. When investors perceive lower risk, they demand a lower interest rate to lend their money, so a country can borrow more cheaply.
Makes sense. Practicing, a sovereign credit rating assesses a country's ability to repay its debt, which directly impacts foreign investment and borrowing costs.
In short, a good sovereign credit rating is like a good report card for a country, making it cheaper and easier to borrow money on the global stage.
So what does this all mean? From the hustle of the money market to the simple, instant click of a UPI payment, we've journeyed through the entire nervous system of India's economy.
Absolutely. Let's do a quick recap. Today, our broad macro theme was the financial market and payment system.
Right.
First, we covered financial market structure, learning the difference between the money market, RBI regulated, and the capital market, SEBI regulated.
Okay.
Then, we met the market's referee, SEBI, and understood its role in protecting investors. We decoded complex terms like AIFs, derivatives, and the illegal act of front-running. We visited Gift City and its game-changing FCSS.
Right.
We also mastered the bond yield seesaw and looked at the rulemakers, the Payments Regulatory Board, and the revolutionary UPI.
And finally,
Finally, we touched upon landmarks like the BSE and the country's report card, the sovereign credit rating.
wow, what a journey. Now to really make this stick, here are a few content probes to think about. 1. Using the analogy of borrowing money, explain the difference between money market and capital market. 2. Explain SEBI's role in one simple sentence. 3. What is the core difference between a Category 1 AIF and a Category 3 AIF? 4. Why is the relationship between bond price and bond yield like a seesaw? 5. How is the global expansion of UPI a form of India's soft power? 6. If a country's sovereign credit rating gets downgraded, what are 2 potential negative consequences?
And here's a final challenge. Pick any one topic we discussed today, say UPI, and try to explain it to a friend or family member in under 60 seconds. See if you can make them understand why it's a big deal.
That's it for this deep dive. It was a blast unpacking all of this. If you learned something new and enjoyed this journey, hit that like button, share it with a curious friend, and make sure you're subscribed for more. Until next time, stay curious.
सोचो एक सिंगल क्लिक से आपका पैसा दुनिया के किसी भी कोने में इन्वेस्ट हो सकता है। कूल ना?
Absolutely cool.
बट ये पैसा, ये फॉरेन मनी, हाउ डज इट एक्चुअली वर्क? और जब न्यूज़पेपर्स में हेडलाइन आती है एफडीआई इनफ्लोज हैव ड्रॉप्ड, व्हाट डज दैट इवन मीन फॉर अस?
Exactly. ये बहुत कंफ्यूजिंग हो सकता है.
टुडे हम इस फॉरेन मनी के मेज को डिकोड करेंगे दोस्त. एंड बिफोर वी डाइव इनटू दिस इकोनॉमिक एडवेंचर, एक छोटा सा काम.
प्लीज कर लीजिए.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, and turn that notification bell on. You absolutely don't want to miss these knowledge-packed sessions. समझे? Let's get started.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for today's session. हमारा रोड मैप बिल्कुल क्लियर है. First, we'll break down the big fight, FDI versus FPI. दोनों में क्या फंडामेंटल फर्क है.
हाँ, ये सबसे important है.
Then we'll do a deep dive into foreign direct investment, यानी FDI itself. इसके रूल्स और recent trends को समझेंगे.
Okay.
उसके बाद we'll explore the world of foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, the so-called hot money.
Hot money, ये term important है.
फिर एक super interesting topic, internationalization of the rupee. हमारा रूपी ग्लोबल स्टेज पर कैसे जा रहा है.
अरे वाह.
नेक्स्ट वील टॉक अबाउट रेमिटेंस टैक्स और वो पैसा जो हार्ड वर्किंग इंडियंस घर वापस भेजते हैं.
उस पर भी टैक्स. इंटरेस्टिंग.
फिर आएंगे फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट्स पर जिसमें हम इंडिया यूके एंड द गेम चेंजिंग इंडिया EFTA डील्स को समझेंगे.
Okay, the big deals.
एंड फाइनली we'll wrap up with India's ambitious export promotion mission. Ready ho for this economic marathon?
Absolutely. Ready. Let's go. Okay, let's kick things off with our first topic. Vyapak micro theme. Vyapak micro theme. Understanding the two major types of foreign investment. FDI versus FPI. The big difference. Okay, let's unpack this. FDI, yani foreign direct investment, is like a long-term commitment. Socho, it's like getting married to a country's economy.
क्या एनोलॉजी है.
You're in it for the long haul. On the other hand, FPI, yani foreign portfolio investment, is more like short-term dating.
ओके.
You're looking for quick gains and can leave anytime. So FDI is for long-term growth and FPI is for short-term profits.
That's a fantastic analogy और ये कोर डिफरेंस को परफेक्टली कैप्चर करती है. लेट मी गिव यू अ रियल लाइफ एग्जांपल. जब एप्पल डिसाइड करता है कि वो इंडिया में एक नया आईफोन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग प्लांट बनाएंगे, बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स इन्वेस्ट करके, फैक्ट्रीज और जॉब्स क्रिएट करके.
A classic Make in India example.
एग्जैक्टली, दैट इज अ क्लासिक केस ऑफ FDI. वो फिजिकली प्रेजेंट है, एसेट्स बिल्ड कर रहे हैं एंड दे आर हियर फॉर इयर्स, मे बी इवन डेकेड्स. बट अगर एक US बेस्ड इन्वेस्टमेंट फंड रिलायंस के 1 लाख शेयर्स स्टॉक मार्केट पे खरीदता है,
सिर्फ प्रॉफिट के लिए.
हाँ, सिर्फ इस उम्मीद में कि प्राइस बढ़ेगा और वो कुछ महीनों में बेचकर निकल जाएंगे, दैट्स FPI. एकदम क्लियर, राइट?
Absolutely. So let's get into the discussion.
फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट इंडिया के इकोनॉमिक इंजन के लिए फ्यूल जैसा है, बट सारा फ्यूल एक जैसा नहीं होता. हमारे सोर्सेज में एक इन्फोग्राफिक है जो क्लियरली ये दो डिफरेंट पार्ट्स दिखाता है, FDI एंड FPI.
Background. India, as a developing economy, needs a massive amount of foreign capital to fund its growth ambitions. But policymakers बहुत particular हैं. उन्हें stable, long-term capital पसंद है.
ऑब्वियसली कौन नहीं चाहेगा.
That's why FDI is generally encouraged more than FPI. The impact of these two on our economy is poles about.
Core logic. Let's break down the infographic starting with FDI. FDI or foreign direct investment is a strategic long-term investment. Think in terms of years or even decades.
Decades. बिल्कुल.
It enters through what we call the primary market. इसका मतलब है it's about creating new tangible assets, building a factory, setting up a business, or acquiring a significant stake.
और significant का मतलब है more than 10%.
Exactly. More than 10% in an existing Indian company. This directly creates jobs and, most importantly, often brings advanced technology with it.
Right. And its impact on the capital market is that it builds a stable foundation. It
Exactly.
shows long-term trust in a country's economy. And what about the rupee?
रुपी भी स्टेबल रहता है.
The inflow of money is steady and predictable, so the rupee generally remains stable. The RBI rarely has to intervene because of FDI flows. So the summary is that FDI is a stable growth engine that boosts both jobs and the country's GDP. It's the kind of investment that builds an economy brick by brick.
Now let's switch to the other side of the coin. FPI. FPI or foreign portfolio investment is purely financial and very short term. हम दिनों, हफ्तों या महीनों की बात कर रहे हैं.
Itna short term.
It operates in the secondary market, meaning it involves buying and selling existing assets like stocks and bonds. Usually the stake is small, defined as less than 10% of a company.
हाँ, ये 10% की line बहुत important है.
और यहाँ goal सिर्फ एक है, to make a profit from price fluctuations.
Exactly. And its impact on the market is the opposite of FDI. High volatility. इसको hot money भी कहते हैं. A term we should definitely remember.
Hot money. Noted.
ये market में liquidity तो लाता है, which is good. But it can also drive sudden bull or bear runs अगर FPIs decide to pull their money out all at once.
तो market crash हो सकता है.
The stock market can crash. और रुपी पर इसका impact? High fluctuation. जब FPI inflow होता है, the rupee strengthens rapidly. जब outflow होता है, the rupee can crash. The RBI often has to step in to manage this volatility.
So FPI का summary है, it's a market mover.
बिल्कुल. It brings both liquidity and a lot of instability.
Real world impact. So the impact is crystal clear. When FDI is high, we see new factories, better infrastructure, and more jobs for people on the ground. When FPI is high, the stock market becomes a roller coaster.
सही में.
It can be great for short-term traders, but it can create a lot of uncertainty for the broader economy.
Conclusion. Basically, for sustainable, long-term economic growth, India needs to focus on attracting more FDI. FPI is useful for market depth and liquidity, but we cannot be overly dependent on it.
Balance is key.
The key is to find the right balance. That's a great summary. Now let's make this more concrete with some questions. This will really help in retaining the information.
Cross-questioning. Okay, my first question is for our listeners preparing for exams like the UPSC prelims. The term hot money is very frequently associated with FPI. Why exactly is it called hot? What's the core idea?
That's a crucial question. It's called hot money because it can move in and out of a country's market extremely quickly.
Overnight B.
Sometimes overnight, chasing the highest short-term interest rates or returns. Imagine trying to hold hot water in your hands. It's difficult to contain and can scald you. Similarly, this rapid movement of capital can burn an economy by causing sudden instability.
Wow, what a powerful image.
So yaad rakhna, the term hot is directly linked to its speed and volatility.
That makes perfect sense. Here's another one. The 10% threshold seems to be the magic number that separates FDI and FPI. Why was this specific number chosen? Why not 5% or 15%?
The 10% threshold is an internationally accepted standard largely popularized by organizations like the IMF and OECD. The logic is that an investment below 10% is generally not large enough to give the investor any significant influence or control over the company's management decisions.
अच्छा, तो ये कंट्रोल का खेल है.
It's a passive investment, but once you cross the 10% mark, you are considered to have a significant voice in the company's affairs. It signals a shift in intent from passive financial gain to active strategic interest.
Interesting. So it's about the intent to control. Now you mentioned that a high FPI inflow can make the rupee strong. On the surface, a strong rupee sounds like a good thing, right? Why would the RBI be worried about it?
This is a classic economic dilemma. While a strong rupee makes our imports cheaper, which is good for consumers,
Yeah, हमें सस्ते iPhones मिलेंगे.
maybe, but it can be disastrous for our exporters. Imagine an Indian software company that earns its revenue in dollars. If the rupee suddenly strengthens from 80 to 75 per dollar, their dollar earnings are now worth less in rupees.
उनका profit margin कम हो जाएगा.
Exactly. Their products become more expensive for foreign buyers, making them less competitive. The RBI's goal is not necessarily a strong or a weak rupee, but a stable rupee. Sudden, sharp movements in either direction are bad for business planning.
That clarifies the stability objective perfectly. Let's dig a bit deeper into the benefits. Why is technology transfer almost exclusively associated with FDI and never with FPI?
It comes back to the nature of the investment. An FPI investor is just buying a piece of paper, a share certificate, on a stock exchange. They might not even know what the company's factory looks like.
सही बात है.
Great example. Last question for this section, and this connects to our next topic. Can an FPI investment evolve and become an FDI investment later?
Absolutely, and it happens quite often. An FPI might start by buying a 5% stake. Over time, as they gain confidence in the company and the market, they might increase their holding.
Or जैसे ही 10% cross किया, the moment the total stake crosses that 10% threshold, they are required by law to reclassify their entire investment as FDI. Of course, this is subject to certain rules and approvals, which we'll discuss in great detail in our next section.
Fantastic. Now pause and practice saying, FDI is long-term, creates physical assets and brings stability. FPI is short-term, trades financial assets and brings volatility.
In short, FDI is about building the economy, while FPI is about moving the market. Vyapak micro theme, Vyapak micro theme. Deep dive into India's FDI landscape.
Foreign direct investment, FDI, the inside story. So now that we know what FDI is, let's go deeper. FDI is the big long-term investment from foreign entities directly into India's productive assets, factories, companies, infrastructure.
Building things, not just trading paper.
Exactly. A phenomenal real-life example is Google's massive investment in Geo platforms. That wasn't just Google buying some shares. It was a deep strategic partnership to shape India's digital future together.
That's a perfect example of strategic FDI. So let's look at the latest buzz from our sources. According to an RBI bulletin from June 2025, India's net FDI inflows saw a shocking 96% drop compared to the previous financial year.
96%? That's a huge number.
It is. Now, that's a headline that grabs your attention. So let's decode what that really means.
We're going to examine the rules, the roots, and the recent trends in FDI in India.
Background. For years, India has been actively creating policies to make itself an attractive destination for FDI. The goal is to boost the Make in India initiative and become a global manufacturing hub. That's why these FDI numbers are tracked so closely by the government and economists.
Core logic. First, let's talk about governance and regulation. FDI in India is primarily controlled by a few key laws. The FEMA Act of 1999, The government's consolidated FDI policy, which is updated periodically.
हाँ, इसका लेटेस्ट वर्जन 2020 का है, I think.
Correct. और Foreign Exchange Management Rules of 2019. सब कुछ इन्हीं रूल्स के दायरे में होता है.
What's really fascinating here is the concept you mentioned earlier. Gross versus net FDI. ये समझना बहुत जरूरी है. Gross FDI is the total amount of investment that comes into India. सोचो, ये total पैसा है जो इंडिया में आया.
Simple. Total inflow.
But net FDI gives a much clearer picture. The formula is net FDI equals gross FDI minus outward FDI.
Right.
And outward FDI itself has two components. Repatriation.
Repatriation यानी जब foreign firms इंडिया से अपना profit वापस ले जाती हैं.
Yes. Plus outward FDI by Indian firms. यानी जब हमारी अपनी इंडियन कंपनीज विदेश में इन्वेस्ट करती हैं. So that 96% drop was in net FDI. This means it could be because foreign firms took out a lot of profit.
Or because Indian companies invested heavily overseas.
दोनों possibilities हैं.
Exactly.
Precisely. Now, how does this money enter India? There are two main entry routes. The first and most common one is the automatic route. इसमें an investor does not need any prior approval from the RBI or the government.
मतलब आसान रास्ता.
It's the default route for most sectors. For example, in sectors like agriculture, coal mining, telecom services, and even up to 100% in the insurance sector, FDI is allowed via the automatic route. It's designed to be fast and easy.
और दूसरा, the second path is the government route. यहाँ you need to get prior approval from the concerned government ministry. These investment proposals are scrutinized carefully before getting the green light.
ये sensitive sectors के लिए होगा.
बिल्कुल. This route is typically reserved for more sensitive sectors.
It's also important to know that there are some prohibited sectors where FDI is completely banned, no matter what.
No entry at all.
These include the lottery business, gambling and betting, including casinos,
सही है?
chit funds, nidhi companies, and any sectors that are not open to private investment at all, like atomic energy and core railway operations.
Now for some key statistics from our sources which tell a powerful story. Despite recent fluctuations, the overall trend is very positive. FDI inflows have seen a massive jump from about $36.5 billion in 2013-14 to over $81 billion in 2024-25.
Wow, that's more than double in a decade?
It is. Looking at sector-wise trends for 24-25, the service sector was the biggest magnet, attracting 19% of all FDI. It was followed by computer software and hardware at 16%, and then trading at 8%.
Service sector leading, that's not a surprise.
And which countries are investing the most? The list of source countries is quite revealing. The biggest investor is Singapore, accounting for a huge 30% of total FDI.
Singapore?
Yes, it's followed by Mauritius at 17%, and then the USA at 11%.
Real-world impact. These FDI policies are not just rules on paper. They decide how much money comes into India and which parts of our economy get to grow faster. A liberal policy can supercharge economic growth, but it must always be balanced with national interests.
Conclusion. So while the recent fall in net FDI is a point of concern that needs to be watched, India's overall FDI story, when you look at the gross numbers and the decade-long trend, is still very strong.
The foundation seems solid.
It does. Let's test that understanding.
Cross-questioning. Okay, here's a classic prelim-style question. A statement is given. A sharp fall in net FDI is always detrimental to the economy. Is this statement true or false, and why?
That statement is false. The word always is the trap.
Ah, the classic UPSC trap word.
Exactly. You have to ask why net FDI fell. If it's because of high repatriation of profits, meaning foreign companies are taking money out without reinvesting, then yes, it's a warning sign.
But what's the other side?
But what if it fell because Indian companies like Tata or Reliance made huge overseas acquisitions? That's a sign of the growing strength and global ambition of Indian businesses, which is actually a very good thing for the economy in the long run. So context is king.
That's a fantastic insight. Now, looking at the prohibited list, why are seemingly small-scale sectors like Nidhi Company and chit funds kept out of the reach of FDI?
That's a great question, Kungu. About protecting the local financial ecosystem, Nidhi companies and chit funds are unique, traditional, community-based savings and lending mechanisms in India.
हाँ, ये ज़मीन से जुड़ी हुई चीज़ें हैं.
They often operate on a small scale and serve people who may not have access to formal banking. The government prohibits FDI in these sectors to shield them from foreign influence and predatory practices, and to preserve their community-centric informal structure. It's about protecting small domestic financial systems.
Right. Now, this one has always intrigued me. The data shows Singapore and Mauritius, two relatively small island nations, as India's top sources of FDI. How is that possible? Where is the money really coming from?
This points to a fascinating mechanism in global finance. The money isn't actually Singaporean or Mauritian.
तो फिर कहाँ का है?
It is often American, European, or Japanese capital that is simply routed through these countries. Why? Because for many years, India had very favorable tax treaties with them, particularly the Double Taxation Avoidance Agreements, or DTAA.
अच्छा, टैक्स बचाने के लिए.
Precisely. Global companies would set up shell companies there to channel their investment into India, allowing them to save a lot on taxes. This practice is famously known as treaty shopping.
Treaty shopping. Got it. Let's talk about the routes. Does automatic route for FDI mean there is zero regulation or checking? Can anyone just send money?
Not at all. That's a common misconception. Automatic route only means that no prior approval is needed from the government.
सिर्फ prior approval नहीं चाहिए.
Yes. However, the investment must still comply with all other applicable laws and regulations of the land. The company still has to report the transaction to the RBI within a specific time frame. You can think of it like the green channel at customs in an airport.
Good one.
You can walk through, but you can still be stopped for a random check, and you are still expected to have followed all the rules.
Perfect analogy. Last question for this section. The data shows the service sector consistently gets the highest FDI. Why is that? Why not manufacturing, which the government is pushing so hard?
It's because investment follows a country's natural strengths. India's biggest strength on the global stage is its massive, skilled, English-speaking workforce, especially in IT, finance, and consulting.
हमारा human capital.
Exactly. Our economy is service-driven. Global companies want to tap into this incredible human capital and also cater to our huge domestic market for services. While manufacturing FDI is growing, services remain the path of least resistance and highest return for many foreign investors. It's a natural fit.
Makes total sense. Okay, everyone, practice saying this. India has two FDI routes, the fast automatic route and the approval-based government route. And net FDI is the gross FDI minus repatriation and outward investment by Indian firms.
In short, FDI is a highly regulated long-term investment, vital for India's growth, with specific rules for where and how foreign capital can be invested.
Vyapak, macro theme.
Vyapak macro theme. The role and regulation of short-term foreign capital.
Foreign portfolio investors, FPIs, the market movers.
All right, let's pivot from the stable world of FDI to the fast and furious world of FPIs. As we discussed, FPIs are foreign investors who buy financial assets in India.
Stocks, bonds.
Like stocks and bonds, without taking any substantial control of the company. Their main goal is financial return, and they are typically very short-term players. Socho, these are the foreign players in our stock market game.
And to give you a real-life example, think of a large US-based hedge fund or a global pension fund like Morgan Stanley or the California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS. They invest billions of dollars in the Indian stock market. बड़े नाम है ये.
They might buy shares of Infosys, HDFC Bank, and TCS. Their goal isn't to run these companies, it's simply to benefit from their growth by selling the shares at a higher price later. That is classic FPI activity.
And here's a news flash from our sources that shows just how powerful these players are. As per NSDL data, FPI sold shares worth a staggering 2.02 trillion rupees in the calendar year up to October.
2.02 trillion.
Yes, that's a massive outflow of money. And it shows just how quickly they can change their minds and exit the market.
Introduction. We're going to understand the rules that govern FPIs and why they are called a double-edged sword.
Background. FPIs are crucial for the health of Indian capital markets. They bring in enormous amounts of money, which provides liquidity, meaning it's easier to buy and sell shares, and helps in price discovery.
Price discovery यानी a stock की सही price set करने का process.
Correct. But this quick entry and exit can also cause a lot of instability.
Core logic. The most important rule to understand about FPIs is the 10% rule. This is the bright red line. An individual FPI or its investor group is not allowed to hold more than 10% of the total paid-up equity capital of any single Indian company.
The magic number again.
This rule is what legally ensures they remain portfolio investors and don't become strategic investors.
So a natural question arises, what if they exceed 10%? This can happen, for instance, if a company buys back its own shares, which automatically increases the percentage holding of all remaining shareholders.
अच्छा, ये interesting case है.
Or दूसरा option,
Option 2.
reclassify as FDI. They can apply to have their investment converted from FPI to FDI. But this reclassification is not automatic. The RBI and SEBI introduced a strict reclassification framework in 2024 with specific conditions.
हाँ, ये conditions important है.
Let's unpack those conditions. First, no reclassification in prohibited sectors. If an FPI accidentally crosses the 10% limit in a company that operates in a sector where FDI is prohibited, like gambling.
तो उन्हें बेचना ही पड़ेगा. No choice.
Exactly. They must sell the shares. Second, government approval might be needed. If the FPI is investing in a sector where FDI requires government approval, they will have to go through that same approval process.
Especially for investors from countries that share a land border with India
Like China.
due to national security concerns.
Bilkul. Third, and this is key, the Indian company's concurrence is mandatory. The board of the Indian company must agree to have this investor as a long-term strategic partner.
they can say no.
Real world impact. So, when FPIs pull out money, like the 2.02 trillion outflow we saw in the news, the stock market falls and the rupee weakens. This doesn't just affect stock market investors.
Bilkul. It can increase the cost of our imports and affect the whole economy.
Conclusion. FPIs are truly a double-edged sword. They provide essential liquidity and make our markets vibrant, but they also bring significant risk and volatility. The main job of regulators like SEBI and RBI is to manage this risk and create a stable environment.
All right, time to solidify this with some questions.
Cross-questioning. Okay, here's a conceptual one for you, often asked in exams. The 10% limit is on a company's paid-up equity capital. What is the fundamental difference between paid-up capital and authorized capital?
That's a great question that tests the basics. Authorized capital is the maximum amount of capital that a company is legally allowed to raise by issuing shares, as mentioned in its constitutional documents.
It's the upper ceiling.
Yes. Paid-up capital, on the other hand, is the actual amount of money that the company has received from its shareholders in exchange for shares. It's the real money that has come in. The FPI limit is on the paid-up capital because that represents the current real ownership structure of the company.
Perfectly explained. Next question. You mentioned extra scrutiny for investments from land-bordering countries. What is the specific national security concern here?
The primary concern is preventing what are known as hostile takeovers of Indian companies by entities from neighboring countries, especially in critical or sensitive sectors.
Acha.
After the border tensions with China, the government wanted to ensure that foreign entities couldn't take advantage of a depressed market to buy significant stakes in Indian firms that is strategic to our national interest. It's a layer of economic defense.
Exactly. Let's talk about reclassification. Why is the Indian company's concurrence or agreement so important? Why can't the FPI just decide on its own?
Because converting from FPI to FDI fundamentally changes the relationship. As an FPI, the investor is a passive, silent partner. But as an FDI investor with over 10%, they become a strategic partner with a right to influence management.
Exactly. Possibly even claim a seat on the board of directors.
Exactly. The Indian company's existing management and promoters must be comfortable with this new long-term and much more involved relationship. It's like moving from being a casual friend to a family member. Everyone in the family has to agree.
Excellent analogy. Here's a vocabulary check. What is the difference between divestment and disinvestment? The terms sound similar.
They are similar but used in different contexts. Divestment is a general term for the selling of an asset or shares. Any private entity, like an FPI, can divest its holdings.
Or disinvestment?
Disinvestment is a specific term usually reserved for when the government sells its stake in a public sector undertaking, PSU, like LIC or Air India. So FPIs divest while the government disinvests.
Fantastic distinction. Last question. If FPIs are so volatile and bring so much risk, why does India allow them at all? Why not just rely on stable FDI?
Because a modern economy needs both. While FPI builds the physical economy, FPIs provide the lifeblood for our financial markets, liquidity and depth.
Sahi baat hai.
Without the billions of dollars that FPIs bring in, our stock market would be much smaller, less efficient, and less attractive to global investors. It would be harder for Indian companies to raise capital. The challenge isn't to eliminate the risk by banning FPIs,
Theek?
but to manage the risk through smart regulations,
Exactly.
like the 10% rule.
That's the perfect way to look at it. Okay, everyone, now pause and practice saying FPIs can hold a maximum of 10% of a company's paid-up equity capital. Exceeding this limit requires either divestment or reclassification as FDI, subject to strict conditions.
In short, FPIs are regulated, short-term investors crucial for market liquidity, with a strict 10% ownership cap to distinguish them from long-term FDI,
Vyapak micro theme.
Vyapak micro theme, making the Indian rupee a global currency. Internationalization of the rupee going global. Okay, this is a topic I'm really excited about. Basically, इंटरनेशनलाइजेशन ऑफ द रूपी का मतलब है हमारे रूपी को एक ऐसी करेंसी बनाना जिसे दूसरे देश ट्रेड और ट्रांजैक्शंस के लिए फ्रीली यूज कर सकें.
Just like the US dollar or the euro.
एग्जैक्टली. सोचो दुबई में कोई रूपी में ऑयल बेच रहा है. दैट्स द ड्रीम.
That is the ultimate dream. And एक रियल लाइफ एग्जाम्पल भी है. हाल ही में इंडिया और यूएई ने अग्री किया है कि वो अपने ट्रेड को रुपीज और दिरहम्स में सेटल करेंगे यूएस डॉलर को बाईपास करके.
वाओ. So it's already happening.
This is a real life step towards making the rupee an international currency.
Introduction. Here's a cool update from our sources. RBI ने बैंक्स के लिए स्पेशल रूपी वॉस्ट्रो अकाउंट्स खोलने के लिए प्रायर अप्रूवल की रिक्वायरमेंट हटा दी है.
अच्छा, ये तो बड़ा स्टेप है.
It is a big step to speed up rupee-based trade and push for its internationalization.
Background. For decades, international trade has been dominated by the US dollar. This gives the US a lot of economic power.
बिल्कुल, जिसे डॉलर हेजेमनी कहते हैं.
Yes, India wants to reduce this dependency on the dollar, which will protect our economy from global shocks and strengthen our geopolitical standing.
कोर लॉजिक. चलो पहले इस SRVA मैकेनिज्म को समझते हैं जो जुलाई 2022 में इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ था. हाउ इट वर्क्स. सोचो रशिया को इंडिया से टी इंपोर्ट करनी है.
ओके
रशियन बैंक इंडिया के यूसीओ बैंक में एक SRVA यानी वॉस्ट्रो अकाउंट खोलेगा। जब इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर टी भेजेगा, यूसीओ बैंक उस रशियन बैंक के अकाउंट से पैसे काटकर इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर को रुपीस में दे देगा।
डॉलर का कोई रोल ही नहीं, सिंपल एंड इफेक्टिव।
एग्जैक्टली अब यहाँ दो टर्म्स आते हैं, वॉस्ट्रो और नॉस्ट्रो। ये हमेशा कंफ्यूज करते हैं।
Let's clear it up. Vostro versus Nostro. Vostro is Latin for yours. So a Vostro account is a foreign bank's account with our domestic bank. जैसे Russian bank's account in SBI. Your money with me.
राइट, योर मनी।
Nostro is Latin for ours. So a Nostro account is our domestic bank's account with a foreign bank. जैसे SBI's account in a US bank in USD. Our money with you.
Vostro, yours. Nostro, ours. Got it. So, what exactly is an international currency?
It's a currency used beyond the borders of its issuing country. It must perform three functions of money globally: medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value.
और इसके लिए currency convertibility बहुत जरूरी है।
Absolutely की। इसके दो पार्ट्स हैं, करंट अकाउंट कन्वर्टेबिलिटी यानी गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज के ट्रेड के लिए करेंसी कन्वर्ट करने की फ्रीडम। इंडिया में ये फुल्ली कन्वर्टेबल है।
हम इंपोर्ट एक्सपोर्ट के लिए रुपी को इजीली कन्वर्ट कर सकते हैं।
यस, बट दूसरा है कैपिटल अकाउंट कन्वर्टेबिलिटी यानी इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रांजैक्शंस के लिए करेंसी कन्वर्ट करने की फ्रीडम। इंडिया में ये पार्शली कन्वर्टेबल है। फुल कैपिटल अकाउंट कन्वर्टेबिलिटी इज रिस्की बट नेसेसरी फॉर फुल इंटरनेशनलाइजेशन।
स्टेप्स टेकन बाय इंडिया। तो इंडिया इसके लिए कर क्या रहा है? आरबीआई का एक एक्शन प्लान 2024-25 है, जिसमें इंडिया के बाहर INR अकाउंट्स परमिट करना और INR डिनोमिनेटेड लोन्स एक्सटेंड करना शामिल है।
और एक स्पेक्ट्रा प्रोजेक्ट भी है टू स्ट्रीमलाइन एक्सटर्नल कमर्शियल बोरोइंग्स।
हाँ, एंड ऑल्सो लिंकिंग आवर इंडियन पेमेंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर UPI विद मेनी कंट्रीज। सो कूल ना?
बहुत कूल। देन देयर इज द एजेंट क्लियरिंग यूनियन। आरबीआई ने प्रपोज किया है कि INR को ACU में सेटलमेंट करेंसी बनाया जाए।
इसके अलावा भी तो कुछ स्टेप्स लिए गए हैं।
हाँ, अदर स्टेप्स इंक्लूड बायलैटरल करेंसी स्वैप एग्रीमेंट्स एंड इशूइंग मसाला बॉन्ड्स जो रुपी डिनोमिनेटेड बॉन्ड्स होते हैं अब्रॉड।
रिलेटेड न्यूज, REER। एक तरफ हम रुपी को इंटरनेशनलाइज कर रहे हैं, दूसरी तरफ न्यूज है कि रुपी रिकॉर्ड लो पर है, बट द रियल इफेक्टिव एक्सचेंज रेट REER शोज दैट इट इज अंडरवैल्यूड।
यस, ये थोड़ा टेक्निकल है बट इंपॉर्टेंट है। REAR definition. It's the weighted average of a country's currency relative to a basket of other major currencies adjusted for inflation.
फॉर्मूला क्या है इसका?
Act. A lower REER, yani undervaluation, makes our exports cheaper and more competitive.
रियल वर्ल्ड इम्पैक्ट। इंटरनेशनलाइजेशन से इंडिया का इंपोर्ट बिल कम हो सकता है, एक्सचेंज रेट वॉलेटिलिटी से प्रोटेक्शन मिलेगी और ग्लोबल स्टेज पर इंडिया की बार्गेनिंग पावर बढ़ेगी।
Conclusion. The journey to make the rupee a global currency is long, but India is taking consistent and strategic steps in that direction, like the SRVA mechanism.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some questions.
Cross-questioning. My first question. For prelims, what is the main risk associated with full capital account convertibility?
The biggest risk is something called capital flight. In times of an economic crisis, अगर convertibility full है, तो investors बहुत तेजी से अपना पैसा देश से बाहर निकाल सकते हैं।
और इससे क्या होगा?
This could lead to a currency crash and massive financial instability. ऐसा 1997 की एशियन फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस के टाइम कुछ देशों के साथ हुआ था।
Perfectly answered. Next, ये terms Vostro, Nostro, Loro. Prelims में इनको याद कैसे रखें?
सिंपल ट्रिक है। Vostro is your money with me, Nostro is our money with you.
और Loro?
Loro is their money with them, a third party's account. बट पहले दो याद रखने से काम चल जाता है। Vostro is from the foreign bank's perspective, Nostro is from our bank's perspective.
Great monomic. अब बताओ मसाला बॉन्ड्स क्या हैं और ये रुपी इंटरनेशनलाइजेशन में कैसे हेल्प करते हैं?
मसाला बॉन्ड्स रुपी डिनोमिनेटेड बॉन्ड्स हैं जो फॉरेन मार्केट्स में इशू किए जाते हैं। इसमें करेंसी रिस्क इन्वेस्टर बियर करता है, नॉट द इंडियन इशूअर।
अच्छा, तो रिस्क इन्वेस्टर का है?
हाँ, ये ग्लोबल इन्वेस्टर्स को रुपी में एक्सपोजर देता है, जिससे रुपी की एक्सेप्टेंस बढ़ती है। इट्स लाइक अ टीजर फॉर द रुपी।
ग्रेट एक्सप्लेनेशन। नाउ नीर और रियर में क्या फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस है?
नीर यानी nominal effective exchange rate is just the exchange rate against a basket of currencies. Plain and simple. REER यानी real effective exchange rate इसको inflation के लिए adjust करता है।
तो बेटर इंडिकेटर कौन सा है?
REER is a much better indicator of a country's trade competitiveness because it reflects the actual purchasing power.
Excellent. Final question. अगर REER shows rupees undervalued, is it a good thing?
ये एक डबल एज स्वॉर्ड है। एक्सपोर्टर्स के लिए हाँ, अच्छी बात है, उनके प्रोडक्ट्स फॉरेन बायर्स के लिए सस्ते हो जाते हैं, बट इंपोर्टर्स के लिए नो, इंपोर्ट्स महंगे हो जाते हैं।
और ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी के लिए?
For the overall economy, a slightly undervalued currency can boost exports and support domestic industry. But extreme undervaluation can lead to imported inflation. मतलब महंगाई बढ़ सकती है।
Brilliant. Okay, pause and practice saying SRVS are Vostro accounts that facilitate rupee-based trade, a key step in the internationalization of the rupee.
In short, India is actively promoting the rupee for international trade to reduce dollar dependency, using tools like Vostro accounts and policy changes. This detailed format will continue for topics 5, 6, and 7. ensuring the script becomes very long, as requested.
व्यापक micro theme.
व्यापक micro theme.
Understanding tax on money sent abroad.
Remittance tax.
The TCS puzzle.
चलो अब एक ऐसे टॉपिक पर बात करते हैं जो बहुत सारे इंडियंस और उनकी फैमिलीज को डायरेक्टली अफेक्ट करता है। हम बात कर रहे हैं टैक्स ऑन रिमिटेंसेस की।
हाँ, ये LRS और TCS वाला मामला काफी चर्चा में रहा है।
बेसिकली जब आप इंडिया से पैसा भेजते हैं अपने बच्चों के एजुकेशन फीस के लिए, ट्रैवल के लिए या इन्वेस्टमेंट के लिए, उस पर सरकार एक टैक्स लेती है।
अ रियल लाइफ एग्जाम्पल, मान लीजिए आपकी बेटी US में पढ़ रही है और आपको उसकी यूनिवर्सिटी फीस भरनी है। जब आप बैंक के थ्रू ये पैसा ट्रांसफर करेंगे तो बैंक टोटल अमाउंट का 1% एज टैक्स कलेक्टेड एट सोर्स या TCS काट लेगा।
यही है पूरा खेल। इंट्रोडक्शन। रिसेंटली इस TCS के रूल्स में काफी चेंजेस हुए हैं अंडर द लिबरलाइज्ड रेमिटेंस स्कीम या LRS, जिसने कंफ्यूजन और डिबेट दोनों क्रिएट किया है। चलो इसको सिंप्लीफाई करते हैं।
बैकग्राउंड। LRS एक RBI की स्कीम है जो रेजिडेंट इंडियंस को हर फाइनेंशियल ईयर में $250,000 तक फ्रीली विदेश भेजने की अनुमति देती है।
$2.5 लाख।
हाँ, पहले इस पर TCS बहुत कम या नहीं था, बट टू कर्ब नॉन एसेंशियल फॉरेन स्पेंडिंग एंड ट्रैक लार्ज आउटफ्लोज, द गवर्नमेंट हैज बीन इंक्रीजिंग द TCS रेट्स।
Core logic. Let's break down the changes. The key instrument here is the liberalized remittance scheme. इसके अंदर आप करंट या कैपिटल अकाउंट ट्रांजैक्शंस दोनों के लिए पैसे भेज सकते हैं।
फॉर एग्जाम्पल, ट्रैवल, एजुकेशन, मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट, बाइंग प्रॉपर्टी अब्रॉड, इन्वेस्टिंग इन स्टॉक्स, सब कुछ इसमें कवर होता है।
अब आते हैं टैक्स कलेक्टेड एट सोर्स TCS पर। ये इनकम टैक्स नहीं है, इट्स अ टैक्स कलेक्टेड इन एडवांस बाय द सेलर, जैसे बैंक या ट्रैवल एजेंट, जिसे आप बाद में अपना इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न फाइल करते वक्त एडजस्ट कर सकते हैं।
सो यू कैन क्लेम इट बैक।
यस, इफ यू आर अ टैक्स पेयर। अब देखते हैं ओल्ड वर्सेस न्यू TCS रेट्स। पहले एजुकेशन या मेडिकल पर्पसेस के लिए 7 लाख से ऊपर के अमाउंट पर 5% TCS लगता था।
और दूसरे पर्पसेस के लिए भी 5% ही था।
राइट। बट अब नए रूल्स के मुताबिक फॉर एजुकेशन एंड मेडिकल पर्पसेस रेट सेम है, 7 लाख से ऊपर 5%, बट फॉर ऑल अदर पर्पसेस इंक्लूडिंग टूरिज्म एंड फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट्स,
यहाँ बड़ा चेंज आया है।
the rate has been hiked to a massive 20% on the entire amount if it exceeds 7 lakhs.
20%, that's a huge jump from 5%.
It is. हालांकि क्रेडिट कार्ड स्पेंडिंग को इससे बाहर रखा गया है फिलहाल।
रियल वर्ल्ड इम्पैक्ट। इसका सबसे बड़ा इम्पैक्ट मिडिल क्लास फैमिलीज पर पड़ेगा, जो बच्चों को पढ़ने भेजते हैं अगर लोन नहीं लिया है, और उन लोगों पर जो विदेश घूमने जाते हैं। टूर पैकेजेस एकदम से महंगे हो गए।
हाँ, और जो लोग फॉरेन स्टॉक्स में इन्वेस्ट करना चाहते हैं उनके लिए इनिशियल कैपिटल रिक्वायरमेंट बढ़ गई है।
Conclusion: While the government's aim is to track high-value foreign transactions and increase the tax base, this move has made foreign travel and other remittances significantly more expensive upfront. The key is to remember that this TCS is adjustable against your final tax liability.
Right. Let's get into the cross-questioning.
Cross-questioning.
My first question is, if TCS is not an additional tax but just an advance collection, why is there so much opposition to it?
The main problem is liquidity. Even though you can claim the amount back later, for that period your money, a significant 20%, is locked with the government. For a middle-class person planning a trip, this upfront cost can disrupt their entire budget.
So it's a cash flow problem.
Exactly. It hits your immediate purchasing power.
Good point. Next, the limit is $250,000 per financial year. Under LRS, is this limit per person or per family? This limit is per person. So if a family has 4 members, each of them can remit up to $250,000 in a financial year, provided they have the funds and are eligible.
अच्छा, तो एक फैमिली theoretically $1 million तक भेज सकती है।
Theoretically, yes.
Okay, is this TCS applicable to non-resident Indians, NRIs as well?
No. This is a very important point. The liberalized remittance scheme, LRS, and the associated TCS are only applicable to resident Indians. NRIs have different rules for sending money out of their NRO accounts.
That's a crucial distinction for exams. Next, why was education through a loan given a lower TCS rate, 0.5%, compared to self-funded education, 5%? What's the logic?
The logic is to promote education and not to burden students who are already taking on debt. When you take an education loan from a financial institution, the transaction is already well documented and tracked. The lower rate of 0.5% acts as a processing fee rather than a major tax, encouraging genuine students.
So it's about supporting genuine needs.
Yes, and making the process easier for them.
Final question. Does buying cryptocurrency from an Indian exchange and transferring it to a foreign wallet come under LRS?
This is a gray area, but largely RBI has been discouraging the use of LRS for crypto transactions. While not explicitly banned, it goes against the spirit of the FEMA regulations. Banks are often instructed to block such transactions. So, officially, it's not a permitted use of the LRS quota.
Very interesting. Okay, time for a practice cue. Pause and practice saying, under LRS, TCS for education is 5% above 7 lakhs, but for tourism and other purposes, it's a flat 20%.
In short, The new TCS rules under LRS have increased the upfront cost of sending money abroad for most purposes, impacting liquidity for individuals. Vyapak micro theme. Decoding India's trade deals with the world. Free trade agreements, FTAs, the art of the deal. अब हम बात करेंगे इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड के एक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट की, फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट्स या FTAs।
हाँ, आमतौर पर इनके बारे में न्यूज आती रहती है कि इंडिया यूके डील फाइनल होने वाली है या इंडिया ऑस्ट्रेलिया डील हो गई।
एग्जैक्टली। सो व्हाट इज एन FTA? बेसिकली ये दो या दो से ज्यादा देशों के बीच एक अग्रीमेंट होता है जिसमें वो आपस में ट्रेड बैरियर्स जैसे टैरिफ्स या इंपोर्ट ड्यूटीज को कम या खत्म कर देते हैं।
The goal is to boost trade between the member countries. A great real-life example is the recent India-EFTA deal. EFTA यानी यूरोपियन फ्री ट्रेड एसोसिएशन में स्विट्जरलैंड, आइसलैंड, नॉर्वे और लिechtenstein आते हैं।
छोटे बट बहुत अमीर देश।
बिल्कुल। इस डील के तहत EFTA कंट्रीज ने इंडिया में $100 बिलियन की इन्वेस्टमेंट कमिट की है ओवर 15 years in exchange for easier market access for their products.
Wow, that's a huge commitment.
Introduction. FTAs can be game changers for a country's economy. आज हम इंडिया के दो क्रूशल ट्रेड नेगोशिएशंस को समझेंगे, द न्यूली फाइनलाइज्ड इंडिया यूके डील एंड द लैंडमार्क इंडिया EFTA डील।
बैकग्राउंड। इंडिया पहले FTAs को लेकर थोड़ा कॉशियस रहता था। हमारा एक्सपीरियंस आसियान FTA के साथ बहुत अच्छा नहीं रहा था। बट अब एज अ पार्ट ऑफ अ ग्लोबल स्ट्रेटजी, इंडिया एक्टिवली FTAs परस्यू कर रहा है टू बिकम अ पार्ट ऑफ ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन्स एंड बूस्ट एक्सपोर्ट्स।
कोर, लेट्स अंडरस्टैंड द हायरार्की ऑफ ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट्स। ये एक लैडर जैसा है।
सबसे पहले आता है प्रेफरेंशियल ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट, PTA। इसमें बस कुछ चुनी हुई आइटम्स पर टैरिफ्स कम किए जाते हैं।
इट्स द मोस्ट बेसिक फॉर्म। उसके ऊपर आता है फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट, FTA, जहां ऑलमोस्ट सारे गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज पर टैरिफ्स हटा दिए जाते हैं।
नेक्स्ट इज कस्टम्स यूनियन। इसमें FTA के सारे फीचर्स होते हैं, प्लस मेंबर कंट्रीज नॉन मेंबर्स के लिए एक कॉमन एक्सटर्नल टैरिफ रखते हैं।
जैसे यूरोपियन यूनियन का एक कॉमन टैरिफ है।
फिर आता है कॉमन मार्केट, जिसमें गुड्स, सर्विसेज, कैपिटल और लेबर सब फ्रीली मूव कर सकते हैं।
और आखिर में इकोनॉमिक यूनियन, जिसमें कॉमन मार्केट के साथ साथ इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसीज जैसे मॉनेटरी एंड फिस्कल पॉलिसीज भी कॉमन हो जाती हैं। यूरोजोन इसका परफेक्ट एग्जांपल है। नाउ लेट्स टॉक अबाउट द इंडिया यूके FTA। ये डील काफी एडवांस स्टेज में है। इंडिया को इससे अपने टेक्सटाइल्स, लेदर गुड्स और एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोडक्ट्स के लिए यूके मार्केट का एक्सेस मिलेगा।
और यूके क्या चाहता है?
यूके वांट्स easier access for its Scotch whisky, automobiles and financial services. Sticking points हैं rules of origin, intellectual property rights और data localization norms.
अब आते हैं इंडिया FTA ट्रेड एंड इकोनॉमिक पार्टनरशिप अग्रीमेंट, TIPA पर। ये डील मार्च 2024 में साइन हुई एंड इट्स यूनिक
यूनिक कैसे?
बिकॉज फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम एन FTA हैज अ लीगली बाइंडिंग कमिटमेंट फॉर इन्वेस्टमेंट। जैसे हमने डिस्कस किया, $100 बिलियन का इन्वेस्टमेंट एंड 1 मिलियन जॉब्स इन इंडिया।
This is a new model for FTAs.
In return, India has given market access to FTA's high-end products like Swiss watches, chocolates, and pharmaceuticals.
Real world impact. Successful FTAs can make products cheaper for consumers, open new markets for our exporters, and attract foreign investment, creating jobs. But एक poorly negotiated FTA हमारे domestic industries को नुकसान भी पहुंचा सकता है।
Conclusion. India's new approach to FTAs is more strategic and balanced, focusing on reciprocal benefits and investment commitments, as seen in the EFTA deal. The aim is to integrate with the global economy on our own terms.
Excellent. Let's start the cross-questioning.
Cross-questioning. My first question is, what is the rules of origin concept in FTAs and why is it often a sticking point?
Rules of origin are criteria used to determine the national source of a product. This is crucial in an FTA to prevent non-member countries from taking unfair advantage. For example, मान लीजिए इंडिया और यूके का FTA है। चाइना अपना सामान यूके भेजकर वहां मेड इन यूके का लेबल लगाकर इंडिया में ड्यूटी फ्री ना भेज दे, इसको रोकने के लिए रूल्स ऑफ ओरिजिन होते हैं।
अच्छा, तो ये चीटिंग रोकने के लिए है।
एग्जैक्टली। ये नेगोशिएट करना इसलिए मुश्किल है क्योंकि हर देश चाहता है कि रूल्स उसके एक्सपोर्टर्स के लिए आसान हो।
Understood. Next, you mentioned the RCP, which India decided not to join. Why did India back out of such a large trade bloc?
RCEP यानी रीजनल कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव इकोनॉमिक पार्टनरशिप में आसियान कंट्रीज और चाइना शामिल हैं। इंडिया का मेन कंसर्न चाइना था। हमें डर था कि RCEP ज्वाइन करने के बाद सस्ते चाइनीज प्रोडक्ट्स इंडियन मार्केट में फ्लड हो जाएंगे और हमारे डोमेस्टिक मैन्युफैक्चरर्स, स्पेशली MSMEs, तबाह हो जाएंगे।
The China factor.
Yes,
The trade deficit with China was already huge और RCEP उसे और बढ़ा सकता था।
makes sense. Can a state government in India oppose a central government signed FTA?
Legally, no. Foreign trade is in the union list of the constitution, so it's the central government's exclusive domain. However, politically, state governments, especially those representing farming or dairy sectors, can exert significant pressure. For example, dairy sector ने RCEP negotiations के दौरान बहुत protest किया था।
तो लीगल पावर सेंटर की है, बट पॉलिटिकल प्रेशर स्टेट्स डाल सकते हैं।
Correct.
In the India FTA deal, how can India ensure that the $100 billion investment commitment is actually met? Is it legally enforceable? Yes, that's the most innovative part of this deal. The agreement includes a specific investment chapter with a review mechanism. अगर इफ्टा कंपनीज इन्वेस्टमेंट टारगेट्स मीट नहीं करती हैं तो इंडिया के पास उनके प्रोडक्ट्स पर टैरिफ कंसेशंस को वापस लेने का अधिकार होगा.
अच्छा, तो एक पेनल्टी क्लॉज जैसा है.
It's a snapback clause, which makes the commitment enforceable.
Great. Last question. What is the difference between a tariff and a non-tariff barrier in international trade?
A tariff is a simple tax or duty imposed on an imported good, जैसे 10% import duty on a car. It's visible and quantifiable. A non-tariff barrier, on the other hand, is a more subtle obstacle. ये हो सकता है एक बहुत ही strict quality standard, a complicated licensing process और a sanitary requirement जो fulfill करना मुश्किल हो. जैसे यूरोप इंडिया के आम पर pest-related restrictions लगा देता है.
Exactly. FTAs often focus on reducing tariffs, but non-tariff barriers can be just as difficult to overcome.
Now let's practice. Pause and practice saying, the India FTA deal is unique because it links market access to a legally binding investment commitment.
In short, India is strategically using FTAs not just for trade in goods, but also to attract significant foreign investment and create jobs.
Vyapak micro theme. Vyapak micro theme. India's strategy to boost its global sales. Export promotion mission. Selling made in India to the world.
हमारे डिस्कशन के फाइनल टॉपिक पर आते हैं, which ties everything together. India's export promotion mission.
हाँ, अगर FDI आ रहा है, कंपनीज प्रोडक्शन कर रही हैं, तो उस माल को विदेश में बेचना भी तो पड़ेगा.
Exactly. एक्सपोर्ट प्रमोशन का मतलब है वो सारी पॉलिसीज और स्कीम्स जो गवर्नमेंट बनाती है ताकि इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर्स को ग्लोबल मार्केट में compete करने में मदद मिले. The goal is to increase our share in global trade.
A great real-life example is the Production Linked Incentive or PLI scheme. इसमें गवर्नमेंट इंडिया में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग करने वाली कंपनीज को उनकी इंक्रीमेंटल सेल्स पर इंसेंटिव देती है. इससे ना सिर्फ डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्शन बढ़ता है बल्कि एक्सपोर्ट्स भी बूस्ट होते हैं, स्पेशली इन सेक्टर्स लाइक इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स एंड फार्मास्यूटिकल्स.
Introduction. To achieve the ambitious goal of a $2 trillion export economy by 2030, the government has launched a multi-pronged export promotion mission. Let's explore its key components.
Background. For a long time, India's exports were dominated by traditional items like textiles and gems. But in a competitive world, that's not enough. We need to diversify our export basket and move up the value chain. आत्मनिर्भर भारत का मतलब सिर्फ सेल्फ रिलायंस नहीं, बल्कि एक मेजर एक्सपोर्टिंग पावरहाउस बनना भी है.
Core logic. So, what are the key pillars of this mission?
First is the Foreign Trade Policy 2023. इसका फोकस है ease of doing business for exporters. इसने प्रोसेसेस को डिजिटाइज किया है और परमिशंस को स्ट्रीमलाइन किया है.
इसका motto है moving from incentive-based to remission-based regime.
Correct. Next pillar is district as export hubs. The idea is to identify products with export potential in each of India's 700 plus districts and provide support to local producers to tap into global markets.
Grassroots level से exports को बढ़ाना. Yes. फिर आती है credit guarantee scheme for exporters. छोटे exporters के लिए सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम होती है बैंक से लोन मिलना. ये स्कीम उनके लिए collateral free credit प्रोवाइड करती है.
इससे MSMEs को बहुत फायदा होगा.
Absolutely. Another key area is developing a robust trade infrastructure. इसमें पोर्ट्स को मॉडर्नाइज करना, न्यू एयरपोर्ट्स बनाना और लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट को कम करना शामिल है थ्रू इनिशिएटिव्स लाइक द पीएम गति शक्ति नेशनल मास्टर प्लान.
क्योंकि सामान टाइम पर और सस्ते में पोर्ट तक पहुंचना भी जरूरी है.
और फाइनली ब्रांड इंडिया प्रमोशन. गवर्नमेंट मेड इन इंडिया ब्रांड को ग्लोबली प्रमोट कर रही है थ्रू ट्रेड फेयर्स, एग्जीबिशंस एंड डिप्लोमेटिक मिशंस टू बिल्ड ट्रस्ट एंड रिकॉग्निशन फॉर इंडियन प्रोडक्ट्स.
Real world impact. An aggressive export promotion strategy can lead to stronger rupee, a lower trade deficit, creation of high-quality jobs, and an increase in our foreign exchange reserves. It's a direct engine for economic growth.
Conclusion. India's export promotion mission is a comprehensive and ambitious plan. It's a shift from just giving subsidies to creating a holistic ecosystem where Indian exporters can compete with the best in the world.
A very positive and forward-looking approach.
Let's move to the questions.
Cross-questioning. First question. The FTP 2023 talks about moving from an incentive to a remission-based regime. What's the practical difference? Incentive regime का मतलब है कि आपको एक्सपोर्ट करने के लिए एक रिवॉर्ड या सब्सिडी मिलती है, जैसे मर्चेंडाइज एक्सपोर्ट फ्रॉम इंडिया स्कीम थी, बट इसको WTO रूल्स के खिलाफ माना जाता है. रिमिशन regime का मतलब है कि आपने एक्सपोर्ट प्रोडक्ट बनाने में जो भी टैक्सेस एंड ड्यूटीज पे की हैं, जैसे रॉ मटेरियल पर GST, वो आपको वापस कर दी जाएंगी.
अच्छा, तो ये रिवॉर्ड नहीं बल्कि टैक्स रिफंड है.
Exactly. It's WTO compliant and ensures our products are not burdened by domestic taxes in the international market. Schemes like Road TP are based on this principle.
Understood. How does the District as Export Hubs initiative actually work on the ground?
हर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट एक्सपोर्ट प्रमोशन कमेटी DEPC बनाई जाती है, जिसे डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैजिस्ट्रेट हेड करते हैं। ये कमेटी लोकल प्रोडक्ट्स को आइडेंटिफाई करती है, जैसे किसी डिस्ट्रिक्ट का स्पेशल हैंडीक्राफ्ट या एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोड्यूस। फिर वो लोकल आर्टिजन्स और फार्मर्स को ट्रेनिंग, क्वालिटी कंट्रोल, पैकेजिंग और मार्केट लिंकेजेस प्रोवाइड करने में हेल्प करती है।
So it's a bottom-up approach.
यस, वेरी मच सो।
What is trade deficit and why is it a concern for a country like India?
ट्रेड डेफिसिट तब होता है जब एक देश के इंपोर्ट्स उसके एक्सपोर्ट से ज्यादा होते हैं, यानी हम फॉरेन गुड्स खरीदने के लिए ज्यादा फॉरेन करेंसी, मोस्टली डॉलर्स, खर्च कर रहे हैं जितना हम अपने गुड्स बेचकर कमा नहीं रहे।
और इससे क्या प्रॉब्लम है?
This puts pressure on our currency, making the rupee weaker. It also depletes our foreign exchange reserves. इसलिए हर देश एक्सपोर्ट्स बढ़ाकर ट्रेड डेफिसिट को कम करना चाहता है।
Okay. Can you explain the role of an Export Promotion Council?
EPCs स्पेसिफिक प्रोडक्ट ग्रुप्स के लिए बनाए जाते हैं, जैसे अपैरल EPC या इंजीनियरिंग EPC। ये गवर्नमेंट और एक्सपोर्टर्स के बीच एक लिंक का काम करते हैं। They help their member exporters understand foreign market trends, participate in international trade fairs, and resolve their procedural hurdles with the government.
तो ये industry specific bodies हैं.
Yes, they are the specialized arms of the export promotion mission.
Final question. Besides government schemes, what is the single biggest challenge Indian exporters face today?
While there are many challenges, one of the biggest is logistics and infrastructure. Despite improvements, our logistics cost as a percentage of GDP is still much higher than in developed countries. Delays at ports, high transportation costs, and inconsistent power supply can make our products uncompetitive even before they leave the country.
सही बात है. The Gati Shakti plan aims to address this very problem.
Excellent point. Now, for our final practice cue, pause and practice saying, India's export promotion mission aims to make districts export hubs and improve logistics to boost global sales.
In short, India is moving from a passive, subsidy-based approach to an aggressive, ecosystem-based approach to become a global export powerhouse.
What a session. बहुत कुछ सीखा ना?
Truly fantastic.
Final recap. Today we explored India's external sector.
Summary. हमने FDI, stable long term और FPI, volatile short term के बीच का crucial difference समझा. हमने इंडिया की FDI पॉलिसी, उसके रूट्स और लेटेस्ट ट्रेंड्स देखे. हमने रुपए को इंटरनेशनल करेंसी बनाने के एक्साइटिंग स्टेप्स जैसे SRVAs को एक्सप्लोर किया. We touched upon the new TCS on remittances, the strategy behind FTAs with UK and IFTA, and finally, India's new export promotion mission.
Basically, we saw how India is engaging with the global economy.
Content probes. Now, to make sure ये सब याद रहे, here are some quick challenges.
Challenge number 1. Explain the difference between gross FDI and net FDI in one sentence.
2. Name 2 sectors where FDI is prohibited in India.
3. What is the 10% rule for FPIs?
4. What is the primary function of a special rupee was-to account, SRVA?
5. What is the full form of IFTA?
And 6. What is the main goal of the Credit Guarantee Scheme for Exporters, CGSE?
Challenge. Try to explain the entire hierarchy of trade agreements from PTA to economic union to a friend in under 60 seconds. देखते हैं कर पाते हो या नहीं?
That was an absolutely power-packed session. We hope our listeners feel more informed and confident. अगर सेशन पसंद आया तो प्लीज शेयर इट विद योर फ्रेंड्स एंड फेलो लर्नर्स.
और कमेंट सेक्शन में बताओ which topic was your aha moment. हम आपके कमेंट जरूर पढ़ेंगे.
मिलते हैं अगले सेशन में एक नए टॉपिक और नई एनर्जी के साथ. तब तक के लिए कीप लर्निंग, कीप ग्रो. इमेजिन करो एक सब्जी मंडी. अचानक